Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show. You know, if you're new to this show, go check out some of our past episodes because we got all kinds of interesting episodes with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from companies ranging from Netflix to Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, OpenTable, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And quick shout out to Carl Sakis of Sakis & Company, who introduced me to today's guest. And our guest is Melanie Chandruang. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. She's the founder. Yes, nailed it. Is the founder of WeConsult, a consultancy helping agencies scale through optimizing their operations. And her specialty lies in strategizing infrastructure around financials, HR and culture, and overall workflows in business. And we're going to talk about some of the changes that are happening in our economy with the acceleration of digitization that's happened through the pandemic. And we'll talk all about that. Of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. Go to rise25media.com or email us at support@rise25media to learn all about it. All right, Melanie, excited to have you here today. And you got an interesting background, having worked in a number of different agencies and then now done consulting with different agencies. And I've done other interviews where I've talked about this. Agencies, digital agencies in particular, have been really on the forefront of the massive changes that have happened in our economy because so many companies have been thrust ahead 5 to 10 years, really making them to work remotely, making them to digitize their processes. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Now, you started first at a custom development shop. And part of the inspiration to what you do now is you had a manager who was not a great manager. Mm-hmm. In spite of that, you started as an admin, you worked your way up. So something went right. But tell me about that experience.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on this. My career, that's kind of what I, say it was a starting point of my career. I did not study any of this. I went to, undergrad for child development of all things. And then I totally pivoted and got a job at a startup. And the reason I took that job was because there was a ton of growth opportunity. I did. I started as an admin assistant and I went on to become the operations manager at that agency and learned the ropes. I was able to learn a lot on that job. However, the unfortunate part was that I did have he was a really tough manager to have. There was a lot of turnover as a result of his management style. And I was there for 5 years. So I really, I got the brunt of it. And I'm not someone that just sits and just follows along the process. I'm always going to point out what can be improved. That's essentially what I do now. And so it's always been in me, but it's really hard to be in that situation when the person is not receptive to change at all. And that was the case over and over that, he had to learn that the hard way because there was turnover the entire time that I was there.
Yeah. There's some people that are just bad bosses, just kind of jerks in general. Maybe there's some people that are, you can't do anything for them. Mm-hmm. But for those that you can, what do you do? Where do you start? It sounds like there was a lot of different things that was contributing to the turnover and contributing to the culture.
Mm-hmm. I don't think he's a bad person. I'm still in touch with him till this day. And I think it's just lack of awareness around what makes a good manager. And I think that's the case for a lot of companies. They will promote someone that's really senior in their role to become a manager. Because if they're really great at, designing or developing or whatever the expertise may be, they've got to be able to teach other people how to do this and be a more contributing member of the organization. And that is sometimes furthest from the truth. Those people sometimes should not be managers. It takes a very specific skill set to become a manager. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And how do you spot someone who has good management potential?
I think someone that is an inherently good listener. I think that really does go a long way, and that they want to offer themselves up as a supporting person to that person's growth. I think that is really the key to what makes a good manager. If I can spot that they really do care about the well-being of other people and the career of, the other people's careers within the organization, that is what is going to make a good manager. There can't be any ego behind it. And they also need to have an understanding of the bigger goals of the organization too, because that person is going to have to align whoever their direct reports are with the goals of the company. And that, just makes it a great, relationship.
All right. I want to go back to March of 2020, at the start of the pandemic, and we're recording this in March of 2022. So it's 2 years on. But take us back to, what that experience was like for you personally, and also what you observed with other companies and agencies and how they were impacted at the beginning, and then as it unfolded over the months following the beginning of the pandemic, at least as it hit North America.
Yeah. My observation was that it was a really scary time for agencies. All types of companies, but agencies in particular. I did see a lot of companies just go through a hiring and spending freeze. They just paused everything because they weren't sure what was going to be happening with their clients, whether they were still going to be able to keep those streams of revenue coming in. And so, it was a very scary time. Fortunately, I was only working with one client at that time, and I was able to continue working with them. And they did have a freeze on spending, but I kind of just made it in there at the last minute, and we forged ahead with operations. It was that at first. And then I think in the months that followed, a lot of agencies then, were realizing that we weren't going to go back into a physical office. And so then it was this huge shift from working in an office atmosphere to this temporary remote work to, okay, we really need to get our remote infrastructure in place because this is a permanent situation for our organization. We really need to make some shifts here. So that was kind of the sequence of events. And then from there, focus on remote work and remote best practices, it was then, going through this crazy, I guess, landscape that we're in right now with hiring, and that it's so competitive. And also that some of their businesses ended up growing during the pandemic as well. So all of that, resulted in some broken processes and infrastructure. So
so many agencies, initially were scared and either had hiring freezes or layoffs or something like that. And then before they knew it, they needed to hire people because, they had clients that wanted to invest in digital marketing or whatever. And so it was interesting how that changed things. And did you find that the agencies you were working with at the time, that they were prepared for this, or did they have a lot of work to do in order to make it work during the remote period of time?
No, I don't think anyone was prepared for it. From a founder standpoint, no, I think it was a lot for founders to have that, I think, riding on their shoulders, leading their company through this really, really uncertain time, I think was scary. And I don't think anyone could have prepared for it. I think from a financial standpoint, some companies were prepared for it. If they had, 3 months or 30% of their revenue in savings, they had some cushion to really fall back on. And they didn't have to make some drastic measures like cutting employees and layoffs. So yes, some preparedness, but yeah, others did not. So
right. Yeah. And then let's talk about building that remote culture and some of the things that you've observed agencies do in order to replace whatever they were doing locally. Maybe it was happy hours, maybe it was just hanging out in person or having lunch in the conference room, to building culture remotely. What are some best practices?
Yeah. I think it's really understanding that communication obviously within any organization, communication is key, but now when you're remote, communication is so important. And so making sure that there are open flows of communication, from the employees up to management and then back down to the employees. It needs to go both ways. That's a huge one. That's communication. I look at that as a piece of culture because that really does create a foundation for the culture at large. And yeah, you can throw fun things in to bond the team, like lunches where everyone gets together. You can do all hands meetings is something that I saw a lot of agencies continue on remotely is, they would still meet every morning to discuss what everyone was working on or however they had, whatever that forum looked like for them at an all hands. And then, sprinkling in like some fun happy hours. But I think one of the biggest culture pieces is to make sure that each employee has a one-on-one check-in with their manager and really utilizing that time to find out how they're doing, because it's really difficult to do that in a remote atmosphere. If you're in an office, it may just happen organically. You see someone, they're kind of, not themselves. Yeah. You can ask them how they're doing. In remote work, you can't see how they are unless they're on, right, for their meeting. And so I think having really managers that are really tuned in to what they need to be doing during their check-ins.
It's funny because one of the things we implemented during the pandemic was an onboarding process with our team. When new people join, they meet one-on-one with a mentor, someone who's been in their position for a while, to give them feedback, help answer their questions, all that kind of stuff. And that's been so popular.
That's great.
So popular, like
a buddy system. Yeah.
Yeah. Buddy system kind of thing. And it goes as long as it needs to, usually, a couple months or something like that. It goes less frequent after a while, but it's just like a check-in. Yeah. It's been, and you're right. It probably would be, if we were in person, it would be something that would just happen maybe more dynamically, but you gotta make space, carve out space for it. What about, recruiting? You mentioned labor, finding, hiring. That's a big challenge right now for agencies. Yeah. How are agencies coping with that?
I mean, it's like a bidding war, right? Against one prospective hire. There are certain roles that are more highly coveted right now, but like project managers, it's so difficult to find talented project managers or producers in an agency. And so, I find that agencies are looking inward to see, okay, how can we improve how we are as an organization to attract these people and then also retain them? Because if it's so competitive, that if you can put on the smoke and mirrors during the interview process, but if they get into your doors and it's not what you have pitched to them, then you're in trouble and they can leave and go find another position in an instant. And so, a lot of companies are having to look inward and ask themselves, what can we do better as an organization to make sure that our employees are happy and fulfilled and content in their work. So, and burnout has been a big one because so many people are working from home, and there's less of a dividing line between where work is and where home is. Yeah. Or, a lot of people have had to work longer hours, especially in the digital agency world, because there's a lot of client work and maybe the agencies don't have as many team members to get the work done. Yeah.
What are some best practices for helping prevent employees from burning out?
Yeah. I think it starts with some financial metrics. I know that's the very, I think, black and white answer, but I do think it's important that agencies are tracking how much revenue they can support with their team. And so they should know that, there is only so much that each person can handle. And there are certain metrics that you can track, like utilization of each employee is really important to track. If you are tracking utilization and that employee is supposed to be at a rate of, say, 75% utilization of their, time, and they're actually, 90% utilized or more, then you know that you're in trouble and you're headed on a path for burnout. And so that I would start there. And then also just checking in with the employees and see how they're doing. Hopefully, they're able to have a voice and be able to let management or leadership know when they're experiencing burnout. And again, that goes back to having those check-ins, those one-on-one meetings where those conversations can happen. So.
And you had a client that came to you. They had a turnover issue. They actually had an operations person that you trained, but then that person ended up leaving. And one of the things that you did was a culture audit. Talk a little bit about how that worked.
Yeah. So this agency came to me. I would call it a symptom is high turnover. They weren't sure why. And the culture audit for me, I do this with every engagement that I start. I talk to all the employees that work there. And I ask them what's going well, what can be improved upon. And those areas that can be improved upon, I dig further into. And it was really insightful for me to do that audit. I was able to pinpoint that there were some pretty big issues. And one of them was that projects weren't being scoped correctly. And so once they were kind of tossed over the fence to the production team, they were left with, just having to scramble to get the work done in the time that was estimated for them. They weren't involved in the estimation process, which is, one of the problems. And so it was, that was a big problem. There was no infrastructure around the start of a project. And then also there was a communication, I think, just issue coming from the founder to the rest of the employees. There were a lot of expectations, but those expectations weren't communicated. And also the expectations weren't very realistic because they were brought into the organization and there wasn't really much onboarding. There wasn't much training to get up to speed to meet those expectations. And so I helped the CEO kind of get all of that information out of his head and into the hands of the employees. And we did see some significant improvements after that happened. And sometimes it's really hard for employees to stand up, I guess, to leadership and say, hey, you're part of the problem. I know employees do not want to do that when it's their boss. And so I kind of act as a buffer to kind of, shine a mirror back onto them.
Because you got a little bit more distance and that's what you're being hired for, right?
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And is that a hard sell to convince a founder that the problem is, one, was them, and two, that everything's up in their head and that they need to carve out some time, whether they like it or not, to get that stuff out of their head?
I think it's not a hard sell. Well, it can be tough as long as I'm able to convey that what the path looks like forward after they do all of this stuff, after they implement some more, infrastructure around, a new client process, or, hey, you need to document all of this, this workflow around how to manage clients. And then that person won't be coming to you all the time. I kind of have to paint the picture of like, here's what it looks like for you after the fact.
Here's how life's going to be better.
Exactly. Yeah. What is a hard sell sometimes is just me being able to interview every employee. A lot of founders that I, speak with in the early days of, seeing if we're a good fit for each other that is something that is a requirement on my end. And sometimes they don't understand the value in that.
Right.
And that's the hard sell. But once I get past that, the information that comes from it, usually I can, relay it to whoever needs to be relayed to. So.
Is there anything else we haven't touched on that you see agencies really focused on these days? So labor shortages, building good culture, especially remote culture, putting systems in place, obviously good processes in place. Anything else that we haven't touched on that you're seeing being kind of particularly important in this era we're in?
I mean, what I just touched on before, which is looking inward to their culture and making sure that they have that proper infrastructure. And that starts with, someone's organizational chart and making sure that the right people are in the right seats. And for me, that means that there are supporting people to the employees. And that would be in a traditional sense, a manager for employees to lean on, and for them to, their sole purpose is to support those people and grow them, and then also align them with the company's goals. So,
right.
Yeah.
Now, final question. I want to ask you about this is my gratitude question. So, I'm a big fan of gratitude. I'm a big fan of expressing gratitude, particularly to people that have helped you along the way. So, if you look around at your peers and your contemporaries, however you want to define that, who do you respect? Who do you admire who's out there doing good work that you respect?
Yeah. Two people come to mind. The first person is Kelly Campbell. She's a fellow consultant in the agency world. And I remember coming across her when I first started consulting, and she stood out to me because simply of the fact that she's a woman. It's a very male dominated industry. And I reached out to her and I just said, the fact that you're a woman in this industry, I just need to talk to you and see what you can teach me or what lessons I can learn from you. And she, opened up her time to me and really guided me in those early days. And another person that comes to mind is Carl Sakis, who actually recommended me for this podcast, is another person that I reached out to early on. And again, it was just, he welcomed me with open arms into this group of consultants, and just was so gracious with his time, and really just he still does this. I mean, we're still exchanging emails and get on phone calls till this day. This is 4 years later now. And he just tells me all of the lessons that he has learned along the way. And I'm so grateful for that, because can be some hard lessons that you learn as a consultant. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And Kelly's great too. Conscious Leaders is one of her companies. She was a past guest on this show. I'll be sure to add a link to that episode in the show notes. Well, Melanie, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, they can find me on my website. It's WeConsult.io. And then they can always find me on LinkedIn too, and just shoot me a message there. So.
Excellent, Melanie. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.